What's going on, guys? It's me, Zach, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one, I'm going to go over a couple players at each position that I think are worth taking a look at in waivers ahead of week 4. It was a really exciting week 3. Lots of kind of really gross games. There were a lot of studs that really didn't perform. We did have some injuries this week, so there are going to be a lot more players on waivers this week that I think actually have value and are worth looking into and putting priority fab bids on if you don't have them or if they happen to be there. So this is definitely probably the most exciting week on waivers so far this season. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to make your teams better, and that's what waivers is all about. That's what fantasy is all about, is making your team better as each week goes on. So really excited about waivers here. It's been really fun start to the year. Been a lot of ups and downs. I'm sure a lot of you are sort of reeling and feeling like you're 0-3, 1-2, and it's going to be really tough. And some of you think you've won your leagues already at 3-0, but I promise that no matter where you are right now, that's probably not how you're going to finish the season. I've had leagues where I start 1-6 and make the playoffs, and I've had leagues where I start 5-0 and miss the playoffs. So definitely just make sure that you keep working to make your team better each week, and the best will work out for you. So with that, I do want to again thank everybody for all the support we've been getting. If this is your first time to the channel too, please do take a minute to like the video, subscribe to the channel. It really helps with the algorithm. It really helps me know that I'm doing a good job. If you have any comments for me or have any questions for me, please do feel free to let me know in the comments. I love interacting with you guys. It's part of what makes this really fun. So thanks again. And with that, let's get into the quarterbacks. Starting off with the quarterbacks here, there's really not a whole lot. In general, it's really tough to find much on the waiver wire in terms of quarterbacks, especially because you often see that those consistent top 15 guys are owned even in 10-team leagues because some teams will roster 2 quarterbacks. But a couple of guys I think are worth taking a look at are Marcus Mariota and Trevor Lawrence. I think if you're looking for an upside play, Trevor Lawrence is your guy here. He's really coming on strong so far this season. He looks good, which is something I wouldn't have said after last season. This Jaguars team clearly seems to be playing well. They're coming off of 2 really impressive wins against the Colts and the Chargers. So I think that I almost expect the Jaguars offense to keep getting better. They do have talented weapons. They've got Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones, Evan Ingram, and 2 really talented running backs. So there's enough there for that offense to keep putting up the points that they're putting up. And if Trevor Lawrence is anywhere near as good as he was supposed to be coming out of college, he certainly has the upside to be worth something here. And Marcus Mariota, he's just going to be a nice streaming option for you every week. Obviously, you're only going to play him in good matchups, but he's got a nice rushing floor with his mobility, and he's going to give you enough points that he's not going to kill you on any given week, so he's worth taking a look at as well if you like his matchup each week. Moving on to the running backs here, I think this is going to be where most of you are going to definitely want to devote most of your attention this week. There's just a lot of players that are in line to get pretty real bumps in their workload in the next coming weeks, even if it doesn't necessarily happen this week, because we're not necessarily certain which of these players are going to be their starters next week, given that we're still dealing with a lot of uncertainty in terms of the injuries that happen to the starters. But guys like Khalil Herbert, Jamal Williams, and Alexander Madison are guys that I'd certainly be targeting on waivers this week. I think that the one I would want the most out of those 3 is going to be Jamal Williams. It seems most clear that DeAndre Swift is going to miss some time. They mentioned that he might be best suited for him to miss the next 2 weeks and then have their bye week. So Jamal Williams would be a priority ad for me if you can get him. He's probably owned in your league, especially if it's a deeper, more competitive league. But Jamal Williams is going to be probably a top 15 running back every single week for the next couple of weeks, and he's been flex worthy up until then. He's getting the goal line work, so he's a guy that I'd make a must add this week. I would also definitely make Khalil Herbert a must add. He's good at football. He seems more and more like he's just a more talented running back than David Montgomery. So even if Montgomery manages to play this week and manages to stay off the IR or any sort of significant injury throughout the whole course of the season, I think that a world does exist where Khalil Herbert starts eating into more of his snaps and has flex value. And like you saw this week, if David Montgomery is to miss any time, we saw Khalil Herbert have 157 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns and added in 2 catches as well. So Khalil Herbert's certainly talented. He could be an absolute monster if he does get that full workload, and he really has it in him to be a league winner. And Alexander Madison, we all know what he is. Dalvin Cook is going to be a top 10 play every single week, and if Dalvin Cook misses, Alexander Madison's that top 10 play. And we saw Dalvin Cook dislocate his shoulder. That's something that happens to him pretty much once a year at this point, so it's not necessarily shocking. It does seem like Dalvin Cook might be able to play this next week, but keep an eye on it, and if he doesn't, Alexander Madison's going to be a must start. The next guys here I would say are less important ads, but guys that I think are going to be worth looking into just because we've seen sort of like first three guys I've mentioned, how just drastically the value of these running backs can change if an injury does occur. So guys like Brian Robinson, Jalen Warren, Samaje Perine, and Matt Breida are guys I'd be looking to get on waivers this week. Brian Robinson is a guy that I do expect to be back in week 5. They did name him the starter before the season happened, and then he had that really unfortunate accident with the carjacking. But Brian Robinson looked good in the preseason. This Washington Commanders team clearly doesn't love Antonio Gibson, so Brian Robinson's going to get opportunities, and if he's any good with them, this Washington offense is good enough to really make him usable in fantasy. And that's, if you can get usable on waiver wire, that's certainly something you should be shooting for. The next guys, Jalen Warren, Samaje Perine, and Matt Breida. They're all backups here, and I'm bringing them up because they're all backups that we've seen show some sort of level of production in the past. We've seen Samaje Perine come in several times and be somewhat relevant for this Bengals offense, and we did see Joe Mixon leave the game in the third quarter with an injury. I bet Joe Mixon would have came back if the game were closer or more important, but we have seen Mixon miss time in the past, and when he does, Samaje Perine is the guy that steps in. He stepped in well again this week and then a touchdown. So Perine's a guy I'd be interested in. Jalen Warren is another guy I'd be interested in. He looks good when he gets the ball. He's sort of almost seems more explosive than Najee when he gets the ball. So he's a guy that I think if he ever does get workload, he's definitely going to put up points. And Najee has dealt with injury over this offseason. He hasn't necessarily been great this year. He's getting still a ton of volume, so it's certainly likely that Najee does deal with an injury at some point this year. And if he does, you can play Jalen Warren then. And Matt Breida, the same thing. He is the only backup really in New York here. And we know that Saquon has injury problems. I know he's looked great so far, but if Breida were to get that workload, he'd be good just because of the volume he'd be getting. And the last two guys I'm going to talk about here are James Cook and Dontrell Hilliard. They're both going to be probably just the pass catching specialists for their team. James Cook seems to be getting more and more involved as the season goes on. We did see the Bills sort of phase out Zach Moss this week, and we saw Devin Singletary be extremely involved in the passing game. This is clearly going to be something that this Bills offense wants to do, and that's throw the ball to the running backs. So if James Cook can ever capture that pass catching role in this offense, it's something that's clearly looking like it's going to be valuable, sort of like an extension of their running game. So James Cook has it in him to be valuable as the season goes on. And Dontrell Hilliard, he's got that clear grasp on the third down role in Tennessee. In games where they're trailing, which might be happening more often this season than we've seen in the past, Dontrell Hilliard is going to be usable. Moving on to the receivers here, there are a lot of guys that I think are really interesting, but nobody that I'd necessarily call a must-add here. The one that I'd be targeting the most is probably Isaiah McKenzie. He does seem to be like he's got a pretty stable role in this offense as their number one slot receiver. He does mix in with Jamison Crowder, so he's not necessarily a full-time player, but they run three wide receiver sets quite often. I believe he was on the field for about 60% of snaps this last week, and when he's on the field, it does seem like they want to get him involved. We've seen him line up all over the field, so McKenzie's interesting just because he's such a part of a good offense, and he's good enough that he can produce. We saw him have a really good week this week, and we have seen Gabe Davis be banged up. We did see Stephon Diggs be banged up this last week. So if anybody misses time, Isaiah McKenzie pretty instantly steps into the number 2 wide receiving role and probably the best offense in the NFL. So you obviously want pieces of that. I'm interested in Romeo Doubs as well. He did step into his largest role so far this season. We've seen Sammy Watkins get put on IR and Christian Watson just have a hard time staying on the field. So Romeo Doubs has an opportunity to be the number 1 wide receiver in Green Bay, and any number 1 wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers is going to be worth adding. Michael Gallup is a guy that I'm interested in grabbing as well. Sounds like Dak's going to be able to make it back pretty early. We didn't see Michael Gallup suit up in week 3, but honestly, that's fine for me. You're not going to play Gallup the first week he's back, but we've seen him be talented. The Cowboys can be an offense that put up a lot of points, especially if Dak comes back healthy. So Gallup is interesting, and he's just worth taking up spot on your bench. Zay Jones is another guy that I'm pretty interested in. He's pretty clearly the number 2 wide receiver for this Jaguars offense, and sort of as I mentioned earlier, this Jaguars offense is putting up quite a few points. They're moving the ball well, and I want pieces of it. They're being pretty concentrated, just with the 3 wide receivers, and Zay Jones, Marvin Jones, and then obviously Christian Kirk. So Zay Jones is an integral part of a decent offense, so he's worth being rostered. Joshua Palmer is another guy who he's a good player. We have seen injury problems come across for the Chargers between Keenan Allen, and we know that Mike Williams is due to miss a game or 2 throughout the course of the season. So any game where he's their clear number 2, he's worth a shot playing, and I mean, you could play him in any week where all 3 are active. It's just not something I would want, but he's worth rostering for sure. KJ Osborne, we saw have his first good week of the season here. I think KJ Osborne is quite a good player. We've seen that this Vikings offense is going to score quite a bit, it seems like, and we've also seen defenses really sort of key in on Justin Jefferson and try and shut him down. So that opens up a lot for the other 2 receivers, in Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne. We've seen receivers Thielen's age really sort of fizzle out, and even in the middle of the seasons really quickly. So if anything happens to Thielen, if he gets banged up, which he's been known to do, then Osborne steps into the number 2 wide receiver role in a good offense, and I think he's good enough to make that work and pay off. So I like him as well. And then guys like Devontae Parker and Josh Reynolds, we saw them have pretty good weeks this week. Of the 2, I think I'm most interested in Josh Reynolds. We did see Amon-Ra St. Brown leave the game a little bit with an injury. He does seem to be okay, but Josh Reynolds has chemistry back from his days into the Rams with Jared Goff. He's a decent player, and they get a really good matchup against the Seahawks this week. So I think you could honestly pick up and play Josh Reynolds this week. It's something that I'm considering doing in one of my deeper leagues. So I don't love it. I get it. It's kind of gross, but I think he's going to be a really usable player up until Jameson Williams plays. And we know that could be in November. So Josh Reynolds is a guy that you could maybe use as a deep league flex play if you need him. Devontae Parker, he's been known to make good plays down the field. He had a really good game this week, but it was without Jacoby Myers on the field, and we did see Mac Jones leave the game with an injury. We don't know how long he's going to be out, so I'm not necessarily buying into the Devontae Parker hype, even though I do like him as a player. And then two other guys I want to touch on are Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson. I am recording this right after the Monday Night Football game, so we did see Sterling Shepard leave the game with what looked to be a pretty serious non-contact injury. We know he tore that Achilles last year. I'm not going to speculate as to what it is for Sterling Shepard, but it is quite possible that Sterling Shepard has to miss extended time, if not the season. I hope not, but if he does, with how poorly Kenny Galladay's been playing, I mean, there's a wide open opportunity for there to be a number one wide receiver in this offense. Both Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson have just been unable to stay healthy and get on the field, but both of them, I think, are talented enough to be usable in fantasy, and if either one of them can take a hold of that number one wide receiver role, they're worth at least adding and holding on to a spot on your roster. You don't have to roster them just because it is the Giants offense, and I have no idea who of them it's going to be, but I think one of them is going to stand out and actually have a good year once they get on the field, so they're worth taking a stab at if you need to. And then last but not least here, there are just three tight ends that I think are worth at least taking a look at here. There's Tyler Conklin, who, believe it or not, is the tight end 3 on the season. And this, so that's pretty just wild. I'm not necessarily buying in on that just because the Jets have thrown the ball a ton this season, and we're going to see a new quarterback come in here. We're going to see Zach Wilson probably in week 4, if not week 5. So I don't know how sustainable that's going to be just because the Jets have been playing a quick different quarterback. Conklin's done most of this in garbage time. I'm not saying there's not going to be a lot of garbage time for this Jets team. I don't expect them to be very competitive, but I'm not necessarily all in on Conklin here. David Njoku is another guy who had a week 2-3 blow up that I didn't really expect. He is a very athletically gifted player. Jacoby Brissett has been known to target the tight ends pretty often, and this offense looks okay, or maybe not a bottom 10 offense. So a world exists where, because of just how concentrated this target share is between Cooper and Njoku, and then a mix in of the running backs, I think that Njoku could get enough looks and be athletic enough after the catch that he could be a decent tight end play if you need him. And then Evan Ingram, he had a down week in week 3, but he's been a pretty integral part of this offense. He had a touchdown and get called back due to he just barely couldn't get his heel in. So Evan Ingram's been involved. He's actually looked pretty good. He hasn't dropped many passes. I don't think he's dropped any this season. That's been his biggest plague so far in his career. So Evan Ingram's decent. He's going to be a nice streaming option just sort of as the season goes on. He's not going to win your league, but he's a guy that you can put in and get some points every week. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.